Everything that we hear is an opinion, not a fact, and everything that we see is a perspective and not the truth. Possibly just a pointless Marcus Aurelius quote, or perhaps there's some wisdom here that can help us understand what's happening in the fitness industry currently. Now, there is a large growing trend of people demonizing certain foods. Now, to combat this, there are, of course, people coming out of the woodworks, but what they seem to be doing is demonizing the demonizers in a less than constructive way, which I find could be problematic. Now, a larger issue that I see is people not really going to take the time and consideration to understand what the definitions and perspective each other have on the issue before arguing about it. And in this video, I'm going to take a couple of video examples and start to deconstruct how we can formulate a constructive argument that directs us towards truth, assuming that that's what we want to do within the industry. Now, this video is going to be less about actually creating an argument against either side here, but more so about how I would create an argument if I had all the information I needed to be able to create a constructive debate that directs us towards truth within the industry, which I find that isn't happening so much in this food demonizing sector that's going on here at the moment. So I'm going to give a couple of video examples, one that's a lot easier to try and extract more information off, and then one which I find particularly difficult to create a constructive argument against.
People in the fitness space are going around using these as their pre-workout, which I highly do not recommend. There's 20 grams of added sugar for 4 pieces. You're much better off going with some dates as a pre-workout snack.
So the first video here, we can see this young girl in a shopping mall or a shop of some sort, picking up a bag of Sour Patches. Big text below saying fitness industry, red flag. The Sour Patches highly doesn't recommend because of the added sugar, it would seem, as at least one of the metrics as to why she wouldn't recommend this highly, and would prefer you to then consume dates as a pre-workout over these Sour Patches. And we could see in the comments for this video that there was a lot of people disagreeing, as well as a lot of people agreeing, and a lot of arguing happening as towards who was actually right or wrong. But before we can do that, the first thing we need to do is we need to really define what some of the key words and the argument actually is here, because it's not so clear to me that we do know what that is. Few of the key words that we want to define here, and the first one would be the big red flag at the bottom. We do not know, based off of this video, in what perspective this person has as to what a red flag is. I have my own perspective as well, and if our perspectives to what a red flag may not match, which means that we cannot debate about it unless we understand what that keyword means. We also need to understand our perspective on what a pre-workout is. This person might have a completely different perspective for what a pre-workout is as to what I would have it. I may define it as any given meal before our workout session, which could be half an hour before, 3 hours before, 5 hours before. These time differences completely change the food that we would want to have as our pre-workout. Their definition in their own head may be that the only meal that they define as a pre-workout is a meal that is had 2 hours before you work out, or half an hour before you work out, and it's very strict. We don't know, in which case the argument completely changes once we understand that. Maybe we can deconstruct something there and make them change their mind on what a pre-workout actually is, and then their whole argument is invalid because of that. And the other thing, and the big one here, is defining what a good pre-workout actually is. Now, we have some idea, some insight on what this individual's perspective of good pre-workout is, and perhaps we could say that any pre-workout with added sugar in this person's perspective would be a bad pre-workout. Now, there's something that we can deconstruct in that we could, if we can make that inference from what she said here, if we can prove that, let's say, added sugar is not a particularly bad thing, especially for what a pre-workout is, then this whole video is essentially invalid for the most part. But we need to understand what her perspective on a pre-workout is before we can make that argument. Now, doing this and defining what this person actually means, we'll also get a lot of clarification on what the argument actually is. I would say from this video alone, it's rather vague. We don't really understand a person's perspective, the definitions, and in which case we can't really clarify the argument in which they're actually giving here. And once we can do that and really clarify and hone down on what it is, then we can start to create a constructive debate or argument against it, rather than just demonizing the person because we think they're stupid. Now, once we have these definitions, another thing that we could do, what could be particularly helpful, is that we could say, in what instances could the other person or myself be wrong here about the definitions that we are giving? And if we can really honestly do that with ourselves and the other person, then we're in a great position, a great foundation here to actually create an argument that will be constructive and lead us towards truth. Again, assuming that that's actually what we want to do, find out the truth of the matter. And then we may ask, well, why do you think that? And this can kind of split into two different directions here. We could say, well, what has caused you to believe that these sour patches are inferior to the dates as a pre-workout? Or what reasons do you have to believe that these sour patches are inferior to the dates as a pre-workout? Now, in this video, we're lucky enough to actually receive a bit of an insight as to a reason in which why she believes that they are inferior, and it is because of the added sugar that they have. Now, a cause, as an example, may be that she could turn around and say, well, I've actually had sour patches as a pre-workout and I felt terrible during my workout, and I've had pre-workouts, dates as a pre-workout, and I felt amazing in comparison to the sour patches, or they benefited my goal more than the sour patches did. And that would be a cause for her belief, rather than this reason that we have. Now that we have a reason, we can sort of understand the structure of how we could create an argument against what she's saying via that reason. Her idea that no added sugar would be a benefit towards a pre-workout. But an example argument for this could be, well, what if the added sugar, as they often are, was extracted from fruits or from fruits? And let's say that the extracted added sugar that is put into sour patches from fruits comes from dates. Would we then say that the carbohydrate sugars that are from dates are the reason for them being a bad pre-workout, yet you're also simultaneously saying that they are a good pre-workout? Now, this could be a flaw in the argument. We don't have enough information here to create this argument because we don't know her definitions, but that's an example as how we can take out a reason once we have the definitions and provide a counter argument that's actually constructive, that leads people to change their beliefs or leads us to change our beliefs directed towards the truth. And then I think it's important to understand the alternatives. We should probably sit there and think, well, what are the alternatives here? If I was to put myself into somebody else's shoes and to really understand their perspective on things, it would help us better create a counter argument against the claims that this girl's having in this video. So for example, if you're sitting here looking at these pre-workouts and you were obese or really overweight, perhaps the calorie content within the sour patches would make you think differently about them as a pre-workout than the dates would, or, as well as the satiating effect of each food. Also, if you were diabetic, your idea on what a good or bad pre-workout may be is completely drastically changed to somebody that isn't a diabetic. So just quickly thinking about that can really help you to understand how you may formulate your argument differently to how you would have done it before you went through this thought process, and it can be really helpful. And then once we actually have all this information that we didn't have before just watching the video, we've been able to communicate with this person, define and find their perspective and really ask the questions that need to be asked. We can then look at the implications of their beliefs. So let's say, for an example, that we created a crude argument that perhaps this person is trying to give, and that they say, well, a pre-workout is a meal that I only have half hour before I work out. It directly benefits my fitness goal within that session, which is to be as energetic as possible for strength metrics, let's say, so that I can beat PRs. And that they're also saying that every food without added sugar is a good pre-workout, because that's their belief. That's the position that they hold. Well, then we could have a look at the implication of their belief, and we could say, well, with that being the case, you would then say that because beef tallow has no added sugar, you could eat that half hour before your workout, and it directly have a positive impact on your strength and energy, which we could easily argue wouldn't really be the case. So there we could show how the belief that they have is probably just absurd, and then deconstruct the argument in a way that they could probably actually agree to, rather than just shouting at each other. And lastly and finally, before we actually structure a full argument, we then need to question our questions. Like, if we can sit down there and evaluate every question that we've given, and we can sit down and go, right, we completely understand our own perspective and the beliefs that we hold and why we believe them and the implications that they can cause. And we understand the other person's perspective, their beliefs, the definitions, and the implications of what their beliefs and perspectives can hold. Then we can finally start to have an actual constructive argument that directs us towards truth. So as you can see from this video, there's just not enough information here for us to actually make an argument that is going to benefit anyone in any way. Now, for the second video example here, this is something that we need a lot more information. It is so difficult to formulate an argument here that it is borderline impossible, and that one is as follows.
People in the fitness industry buy this shit here. That's a fucking destroyed food. Even if you want the egg whites, get the egg white and break it yourself. This is egg white that's been heated up, pasteurized. Guys, wake the fuck up. Once you separate the yolk from the white, this is just shit.
See here, the difference in the two videos is quite drastic. The former video gives quite a bit more information, although not much more, about the actual person's perspective and beliefs. We understand that what they're talking about is a pre-workout being good or bad. We understand that, you know, it having added sugar is a bad thing in that person's belief, most likely, and we understand that they think it's a red flag. In this latter video, we don't really get much information on what this person believes is bad here, and that they even kind of go into that explanation and then just say it's shit. Once you separate the yolk from the white, it's shit, guys. So much less information, much harder to create an argument against, and but much easier to argue with is the issue here. So you can probably see how there's so much discourse about the information this person providing. A lot of their videos seem to be the same kind of concept, not much definition or clarification given, but we'll attempt to go into the information that we would need to create a constructive argument against this person's video, if it's possible at all. So the first definitions we would need for this one is what actually means by destroyed food. Throughout this video, there's a few key terms where they say heated up, pasteurized. We would need to understand and define what destroyed food is. Does it link towards it being heated up? Does it link towards it being pasteurized? We have to define what pasteurized means to this individual. We have to define what heated up means to this individual. Is there a certain temperature of heated up? If I put an egg into a frying pan, is that now heated up and destroyed as a food? Or is it only low level heat for a long period of time, like a pasteurized food would be, that then destroys the food in this person's perspective? And then we need to go into, he almost kind of made a point about the yolk being separated from the white, and there seems to be a divide between if you crack the shell yourself with your own hands, or if it is done by external peoples, or perhaps maybe if it is cracked and opened by a machine, that makes it a worse or destroyed food. but he says that if the yolk is separated from the white, then it's a shit. We need to define what shit means in this person's idea of this egg becoming shit because it was the yolk was separated from the white. And then again, we can start to clarify this person's position a little bit more. If the clarification then becomes to be, well, it is only when the egg is broken by another individual and then heated on a low level for a longer period of time, as in pasteurized, and that's what he means by pasteurized as a definition and a clarification, and is only shit if the yolk is separated from the white. You have to eat them together. As soon as that's separated, it's then a destroyed food. That's the clarification. So then we have an idea of, right, we know that in this individual's perspective, if I buy an egg myself, crack it myself, and heat it at a higher heat in a frying pan and then eat it, that's good. It's undestroyed. It is a food that I can eat, and he's not going to have any issues with it. But if the person, if this egg was cracked by another person, and then the yolk was separated, and then this other person heated that egg white at a low heat for a longer period of time to then pasteurize it, then the food is then shit or a destroyed food. And then we can sort of understand and ask the question of, right, what are the causes and reasons that this individual believes these statements? Why does this individual think that, well, if my friend cracks this egg, that is for some reason worse than if I do it myself? Is there any cause to this? Perhaps he has bought an egg before that had been pre-cracked, and then the yolk was separated from the white, and he bought it out of a carton, and maybe he was like, oh, there's a bug in this carton. This is why this is so shit, because, you know, like bugs can get into the carton when it's packaged. Or maybe he has a reason for it. Maybe he says, well, I read a study once that, you know, if I drink pasteurized egg whites that are contained within a carton, then the bioavailability of those egg whites when they're cooked on a low heat compared to a high heat, for the protein within them is actually halved. Quite a common study, actually, and maybe this is a foundation for his belief here. So then we can start to understand the causes and reasons that he holds the belief that he holds. And then again, we have the alternatives. Once we understand the causes and the reasons, we could say, well, if I also go off and read that study, would I come back and is there any position here where that I could put myself in his shoes and I could change my perspective on things? Is his cause and reason good enough for me to sit there and say, right, if I actually was in the industry that he was in, I believe he was a bodybuilder beforehand, if I was a bodybuilder in the era that he was a bodybuilder, with the research that came out within that era, would I then be more influenced to believe that cartoned egg whites are a shit or destroyed food compared to eggs? And why would they be? And then we can start to formulate a bit more of an argument against it. And then we would delve into the implications of this person's beliefs. But this is where I believe these videos become so dangerous, especially when a video like this is so extremely vague. Because I believe there is enough studies to show that if you was drinking pasteurized egg whites, that the bioavailability of the protein there is actually lessened. And we could see from the examples that I gave on earlier, like definitions and clarification on the video, how absurd his claim really is, in that, like, oh, it was cracked by someone else and it was separated. There's so much of this that's so absurd, but that we could argue against and go, well, what, you know, if it was separated right in front of you and then put into a pan, what is now a destroyed food? It's now shit. Or that doesn't seem to be intuitively quite correct. But if it was never separated, like, what happens that makes it then a shit food? And there probably isn't anything. But if you just went across, if you just made a video against this person, just purely demonizing them and saying, well, this is a shit view. Obviously, eggs aren't shit if it's cracked by and separated by someone else and it's pasteurized. That'd be so ridiculous. But then an individual which follows this person would then say, well, hold up a minute, because here's a study showing that actually pasteurized egg whites are terrible for you and the bioavailability of the protein is awful. And then suddenly you have you have given credence to the other areas of his argument that are so absurd, and his video is then strengthened and he gains more followers because we didn't clarify, we didn't define, and we didn't look at the causes and reasons for this person's belief. We couldn't actually formulate an argument. And when people make a video on something like this that just demonizes the person demonizing the foods, this is where the danger comes into play on videos like this that are so vague. And that is why I think this is so popular at the moment and so trending and gaining such a following, and can possibly lead people to hold some really kind of absurd beliefs. At this particular video, the belief would just be quite funny and absurd, but you could see how this could become dangerous. So there's 2 example videos that actually led me to making this video because they were so different, and I think they contrasted quite well on how you would formulate an argument. But it is something that I'd like to see much more within the fitness industry, and people actually having a constructive debate to avoid any of the issues that could potentially arise, that I mentioned towards the latter video there, in making people hold beliefs that may be untrue, that may be quite absurd, and potentially dangerous. But if you did like this video and you would like to see more content like this, check out this other video that I made here on fitness memes that I took way too seriously. And also please consider subscribing for more content like this in the future, and hopefully see you soon.